So welcome, Dr. Jenny Goodman. Jenny, thank you so much for taking time out to talk to me. I know you've got such a busy schedule, so I really appreciate it. I'm going to read your bio and then we can start talking, if that's okay.
Yep.
So Dr. Jenny Goodman qualified at Leeds University Medical School in 1982 and worked as a junior doctor in general medicine, surgery and A&E. Disillusioned with conventional medicine's inability to actually heal sick people and its failure to inquire about the causes of illness or to do preventative healthcare, she left. She then lectured extensively both on medical sciences and on topics such as women's health, the politics of health in adult education classes. She also did a master's degree in psychotherapy and counselling and worked as a therapist at the Hammersmith Hospital, thinking her days as a medic were finally over. However, in the 1990s, she was lucky enough to discover what is now the British Society for Ecological Medicine, a group of doctors and other practitioners who practice nutritional and environmental medicine. They were asking the same questions that had gone unanswered for her throughout medical school, and they were finding answers, helping their patients to dramatically better health through changes in diet, nutrition, and detoxification. Jenny trained with the BSEM's postgrad course and qualified in ecological medicine, learning in depth about the nutritional and environmental factors that affect our physical and mental health, and passing this information on to patients. She has been practicing ecological medicine for 20 years now, with a special interest in fertility, preconception care, and working with children. For 10 years, she ran a case discussion group where medical and naturopathic and nutritional practitioners share knowledge and clinical experience. And she is the author of Staying Alive in Toxic Times, a seasonal guide to lifelong health, which was published in January 2020. And it is the best book ever, Jenny. I dip into it all the time, and we'll come to that shortly.
It doesn't normally come with millions of sticky post-its attached. That's just my copy.
I've got mine here and it's so well thumbed as well. It's just a Bible, really.
Thank you.
I didn't know, Jenny, that you actually left and started working as a counsellor. So you really left medicine for good. Tell me a bit about that.
I thought I did. Although I always felt ambivalent about it. You know, people would say, how can you waste all that knowledge? And I would think, well, indeed, how can you? But if you can't find a way to apply it that feels ethical and helpful and genuinely healing, I simply didn't. There were specialities I was drawn to, such as psychiatry and obstetrics and gynecology, but I was so appalled at what happened in those departments that I just felt I couldn't be part of it. The department I enjoyed working in most and did the most in was casualty, which we now call accident and emergency, because there they were doing everything right. Yeah, there was no ambivalence for me that, you know, if somebody's broken their head open, you stitch it up. And so I felt happy doing that. But everything else, it felt to me that the people we saw on the hospital wards had been getting ill for decades, and they were finally coming into hospital when something had been the final straw and they were very dangerously ill. And there was no thought of what might have prevented all this beforehand. There was no effort to go out in the community and make sure that nobody got to that point. And there was no questioning the causes of disease. So when I started medical school, I totally assumed I was going to learn about healing the sick, but also about what caused illness and therefore how to prevent it. And not only were we not taught that, it was quite taboo to even ask those questions. I did ask that question of one paediatrician about the number of children with leukemia we were getting who lived quite near the Sellafield power plant, the nuclear power plant. And I asked if this was radiation poisoning, and this was 1980, and the consultant said, I am a clinician. It is not my job to inquire about causes, I just treat my patients. And I think that how successful your treatment is going to depend largely on the extent to which you do inquire into causes. And in ecological medicine, which is what I've been practicing for 22 years, actually, we start by asking about causes. Now, of course, we can't time travel the patient back in time and remove the cause, but sometimes we can actually, because the cause is ongoing. You know, so if somebody's been, I don't know, poisoned by their own aluminium containing deodorant, and that's still going on, you can stop them doing that. And some damage will have been done, but other damage can be prevented. So most of the treatments we use in ecological medicine, which are to do, as you said, with nutrition and diet and detoxification, are also preventive measures. We're doing preventive health all the time. And it's the same kind of things, but the iller you are, the more intensively you need to do those things. And if you're perfectly healthy and just want to do prevention, then you can do those same things, but less frequently or less intensively. So it's all about getting to the root of the illness, which is what so many patients come to us for. And they say, my GP is not getting to the root of it. He's just giving me a pill, just giving me, you know, a tablet. So somebody comes and says, and this is a real one actually, I've suddenly started getting these awful migraines and these awful tummy aches. And the GP says, right, try these painkillers, doesn't work. At the next appointment, okay, I'll send you to a neurologist for the migraine and a gastroenterologist for the tummy pain. And the patient says, yeah, but they both started at the same time and they always coincide. They're both happening together. So surely they're connected. That's where our medical training fails us. It falls down because the GP has no way of thinking how they are connected, because migraine is in the neurology textbook and tummy ache is in the gastroenterology textbook, and never the twain shall meet, which is crazy because our body is one ecosystem. And there are going to be root causes in our environment and in our nutrition and in our past history that are contributing to both those manifestations of disease.
The term ecological medicine, though, isn't something that my patients have heard of, or indeed many people. We've heard holistic medicine, possibly preventative medicine. So ecological medicine, in a nutshell,
okay.
What would you say?
In a nutshell, firstly, it's what the Americans call functional medicine, and it certainly is holistic. It's a form of holistic medicine. And it's not a speciality, it's a way of practicing that, you know, a GP could use if they had the time. And it's ecological in two senses. One is, as I was saying earlier, it sees the whole body as one joined up ecosystem. So, you know, your hip bone's connected to your thigh bone bone's connected to your knee bone, your gut and your brain and your lungs are all connected.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it's an ecosystem, but even more crucially these days, it sees the human body as part of the wider ecosystem that is planet Earth. Right? The Earth is where we live. It's our home. It's our house, if you like, but more broadly. And everything we eat has grown in the soil of planet Earth. And therefore, whatever's in that soil is on our plate and in our bodies. Whatever's missing from the soil from intensive over-farming is missing from our bodies. Whatever's in the air of planet Earth, we're inhaling. And whatever we've put into the water or failed to remove from the water, we're drinking that. So that's the more profound sense in which it's ecological. And in terms of, you know, post-industrial pollution, what I'm saying is you can't poison the planet without poisoning the people. You know, there's no air to breathe other than the air on planet Earth. Yeah. And there's no food to eat other than that which was ultimately, however it's been cycled through animals or packaging or processing, ultimately it all grew in our soil, and the depletion of our soil is affecting our bodies. So just as we have lack of diversity in our crops, you know, we have now huge square fields of monocrops that are all the same. We have that lack of diversity in our gut, the microbiome, the supposedly, hopefully friendly bacteria that occupy our colon and are really an integral part of our immune system. They are going to be also depleted and become a bit monocrop if the food we're eating is monocrop. So the depletion of the soil, the good bacteria in the soil, leads to the depletion of the good bacteria in our guts. And that's just one example of how we are part of the ecosystem of planet Earth.
Right, and you've just encapsulated what was going to be my next question, which is you break it down into good health into two things, which is nutrition and environment, and you've just explained that perfectly. So you have, in your book, you've got 4 golden rules. Tell us a little bit about that.
I will, but let me just come back to what you were saying before about nutrition and environment, because to make it clearer to people, nutrition is simply the good stuff that should be going in, and environmental pollution is the bad stuff that shouldn't be going in.
Okay.
So what we do in ecological medicine is first we look at a person's nutritional status, we see if they've got enough of the right vitamins, minerals, essential fatty acids, fiber, and so on. And we address that through good diet and also through nutritional supplements if and when necessary. And that's putting the good stuff in. But environmental medicine is much less known and less understood. And that is about looking to see, and you can test for this, but you also take a detailed history of where the person has lived and worked, what environmental toxins have got into them. You know, is it mercury from their teeth? Is it aluminium from deodorants and some vaccinations? Is it pesticides because they've lived in the country where the farmer's been spraying their fields? Is it pesticides because they've been eating lots of non-organic food? Is it plasticizers? Do they carry their water in a plastic bottle which sits in the car in the sunshine, and all those toxic petrochemical plasticizers like phthalates leak out into the water and they're swallowing them? Are they dry cleaning their clothes? You know, because dry cleaning fluids are among some of the worst toxins. Have they got in their kitchen cupboard under the sink all sorts of nasty cleaning substances, most of which can be substituted with a damp cloth? Are they putting, you know, all sorts of makeup and cosmetics and moisturizer and stuff on themselves, which again is petrochemical, but there are safe natural alternatives. There are wonderful organic essential oils like lavender, jasmine, orange flower, rose. These are what perfumes used to be, which you can use instead of synthetic perfumes that contain benzene and other toxic substances, which are fat soluble. They're lipophilic, means they go straight into the skin and they head for the fatty tissue, and that includes the brain. So, you know, we're damaging our brains as well as our bodies with all these environmental toxins. And my job and my colleagues' job is to explain to people where that's coming from, suggest the alternatives, and then use detoxification methods to get those things out of the system, which you can do. And so long as people know where that came from and they don't retox themselves, their health can get dramatically better and remain dramatically better. So essentially, it's good stuff in, bad stuff out. But those are not, in fact, two separate modalities, because a lot of the nutrients act as antitoxins and push the toxins out. And a lot of toxins, this is a concept we get from Dr. John McLaren Howard, a lot of toxins do their damage by being anti-nutrients. So toxic metals like mercury and cadmium and lead do their damage partly by pushing out zinc. And zinc helps partly by counteracting that, pushing out the bad stuff. Silica helps to push out aluminium and so on.
So you're saying if somebody took a zinc supplement, for example, then they can push out some of the toxins simply by taking in something good, they can push out something bad?
Not simply, it's one of the things they have to do. So the most common metal poisoning is probably nickel poisoning, and it's implicated in diabetes. And you need to take things like vitamin C and the amino acid methionine, and to do vegetable juicing and saunas and all the 7 detox methods that are in chapter 7 of my book. But in addition to that, zinc will help a lot to push the nickel out and prevent it getting back in.
Okay. So let's move on to your four golden rules. That I think they're fairly easy to remember. It's normally 3 golden. You've got 4 golden rules. Tell us what they are.
Okay, so these are the rules that I think apply to everyone. And they, I think, are the only rules that apply to everyone, because part of what I'm trying to say in the book is that everyone's body is different. Everyone's genetically and biochemically different. And so what you need to eat depends on your own metabolism, but it also depends on the age and stage of life, on your gender, on the climate where you live, and on the season of the year, crucially. So everyone's different, but yes, these 4 golden rules, I think, apply to 99.999% of the population. And the first one is eat your greens, which your grandma probably said, because leafy green vegetables act as a brush. They go through the gastrointestinal system, clearing out the gunk. And they also contain magnesium, which is crucial for healthy mental and physical function. And they contain lots of vitamins and other minerals. So if you have them raw, you get more of the benefit from the minerals. If you have them cooked, you get more benefit from the minerals because you can absorb them better. But if you have them raw, you get the vitamin C and the other phytonutrients which are killed by cooking. So when people say, you know, should I be eating raw or cooked? My answer is yes, both. both, according to type and what suits you, but also more salad in the morning and at lunchtime, and more cooked veg in the evening, so it's more digestible, and also according to the season. So yeah, be a raw foodie in the summer, but be a macrobiotic, only eating cooked food person in the winter. It's common sense, actually. So that's eat your greens, and there's more about it in the introduction to the book. Second rule is cut out the sugar. And the sugar is one of the main poisons that's killing us, actually. And unlike, you know, air pollution, it's quite easy to do something about it. But only if we start off by realizing why we're so hooked on it. Paradoxically, although sugar is poisoning us, the craving for sugar is natural. It's not pathological. So don't beat yourself up. Don't feel guilty if you're craving sugar. We're programmed by evolution to crave sugar because in our hunter-gatherer times, which was 99.9% of our biological history, you know, agriculture and industrialization, just a tiny blip in terms of our biological evolution. In hunter-gatherer times, there would have been very little sugar and there'd have been very little food. But occasionally in the autumn, you would get berries. You get berries and a few fruits, not the oversweet ones that have now been bred artificially, but you know, they'd have had a little bit of sugar in. And so in the autumn, our cave people ancestors would have craved that fruit and they'd have eaten loads of it to put on weight, to put on fat, to get them through the coming winter, where it was going to be cold or there was going to be not enough food available to hunt and gather. So we're still doing that, but we've got this autumn all the year round where we're eating the fruit and the sticky sweet stuff. And the winter never comes, although with the fuel crisis, it may come this winter. We may need to go back to wearing jumpers indoors, as I did growing up. But the point is that the craving for sugar is built in, and it was a survival mechanism from an era where that was useful. That same built-in survival mechanism has now become a liability in a world where there are cakes and sweets and biscuits and ice creams and bars of chocolate that isn't really chocolate, it's sugar everywhere. And of course we get hooked on it. So the only way to not eat sugar is to not have it in your house. And there are lots of things you can do to support yourself and your children to get off it. One of the things you can do is figure out what sort of person you are. Are you a sort of person who will go cold turkey and cut it all out at once, in which case you may get some side effects, but only for a few days? Or are you a sort of easy does it person, and you'll learn to identify what sugar you're eating and cut it out slowly? Because I'm not just talking about sugar that you sprinkle on your food. I'm talking about everything you buy that's packaged or processed, which contains sugar. And it's quite shocking to discover that even a so-called fruit yogurt aimed at children is full of added sugar. And that even a savory dish, you know, if you're still buying ready meals and you get something like a lasagna, which is cheesy and savory, that's got sugar in it, but they call it something else. Anything you see on an ingredients list ending with OSE, O's, is sugar. So dextrose, maltose, sucrose, glucose, it's all sugar. And it feeds the most unfriendly bugs in the gut, and it creates the feeling of wanting more of that thing. It creates addiction, and that's quite deliberate because it's very profitable. The other reason we all crave sugar is that breast milk is sweet and infant formula is sweetened as well. And so that sweet taste is inevitably associated with love and comfort and security. It's a very powerful craving, and we can't get rid of it completely, but we can reduce it hugely. So if you introduce foods with the opposite taste and get to like them, like blackcurrants, which are still really sour fruits, grapefruits, which are bitter, and dark green leafy vegetables, which will taste bitter to you until your taste buds adjust. And then you slowly or abruptly cut out the sweet stuff. Don't get off caffeine at the same time as this. You can't withdraw from 2 drugs at once, and sugar's a drug. Gradually you have less and less sugar. What I find all my patients say, including the children, is as your taste buds get retrained, they start to notice, you start to notice that onions are sweet, carrots are very sweet, courgettes are sweet. You know, I have one kid who said to me, I'm eating my Jenny Goodman red peppers and that's all my sugar. Yeah, and of course, if you're eating it in the form of vegetables, there's fiber going along with it and there's water going along with it. So you don't get that abrupt rise in blood sugar, which triggers an abrupt rise in insulin. And in the end, you have so many insulin peaks that the cells stop listening to the insulin and you end up with type 2 diabetes, which is now epidemic. When I was in medical school, it was called mature onset diabetes because it didn't start till your 50s or 60s. And there are now kids of 11, 12, 13 with this form of diabetes. So yeah, rule number 2, cut out the sugar.
Just on that, Jenny, I know in your book you say when you go to buy vitamins and supplements to take your magnifying glass to read the ingredients. But the same goes for when you're going to the supermarket.
Yes,
because
absolutely.
Patients with the best will in the world, and they think they're eating healthily, and the intention is there. But if you go around the supermarket, even for example, a mayonnaise or a mustard, condiments, for instance, or even I've seen grilled vegetables that are in oil, you'd think they're healthy, but sugar has been added to it. And you need to take the magnifying glass to that as well. You
do. Any food you buy that is in a package, which ideally you'll eventually stop doing, and you'll just buy actual food like meat, fish, eggs, fruit, vegetables, rice, lentils, nuts, and so on. We pick an apple off a tree, it doesn't come with a label because it is just itself, it is just food. So I'm hoping eventually everyone will stop buying packaged food. For a start, the plastic waste is contaminating us and the planet horrendously. I've got this fantasy that we all keep the packaging and take it back to the supermarket and dump it there after every shop. They'd soon go back to being like the old greengrocers who sold everything loose. But yeah, if you're still buying anything in a package or God forbid a tin, you must read the ingredients list. Sugar is almost always in there. So are artificial additives that we'd come to in a minute. Now, you also need that magnifying glass, yes, for buying supplements, because some of them are dreadful. And in chapter 6 of my book, Nourish and Flourish, I explain how to sort the wheat from the chaff, how to get, proper supplements that are vitamins and minerals, rather than the cheap rubbishing ones that are just full of chalk and unnatural additives. So you need your magnifying glass also in the chemist shop. And when you start looking at those perfumes and cosmetics, you will be absolutely horrified what's in there. So don't buy anything from the chemist, go across to the health food shop. But unfortunately, even there, you have to keep hold of your magnifying glass, because if it says natural herbal shampoo, it will have some herbs in it, but it may also have some unpleasant chemicals in it. Sukin is a pretty safe make. Green People is a pretty safe make. There are a few good makes out there, and I have mentioned them in chapter 6 of my book, but it keeps changing. For example, the really good company I used to recommend that made sun cream with no titanium dioxide. And now they've put titanium dioxide in their sun cream, and it's hard to keep up with it. So yes, get your personal care products from the health food shop. And I don't mean a chain that only sells its own products. I don't mean one of those. I mean a good independent health food shop, or a pretty reliable chain like Planet Organic. But even there, you need your magnifying glass. And I think we have to not be embarrassed to stand in the shop and read the ingredients list, because we have the right to know what we're putting in ourselves and on ourselves. There's no body B, just like there's no planet B. So that leads on to the third golden rule, which is cut out the artificial additives. And these are things that are added to processed foods that are not food. And they are mostly inimical to our biochemistry, right? They don't sit properly in our bodies. They are effectively toxins as well as the environmental toxins. So things like emulsifiers, which are put in to make water and oil mix, which they don't do naturally. And the manufacturers say, oh, it makes a creamy texture that customers demand. Well, customers don't go demanding that stuff. The supermarkets produce it, get us hooked on it, and then say that we demand it. Artificial flavoring. Now, why would you need to add flavoring if not to disguise the fact that the food is essentially rubbish? Okay. And there's artificial colorings. I mean, imagine you're tie-dyeing a t-shirt bright blue. I mean, you're not going to suck the t-shirt, are you? You're not going to suck the dye. But our children are buying blue ice lollies. Right? that's blue dye. Now, we know from people who work in the printing and dyeing industry that they have a very high rate of breast cancer and bladder cancer. And yet it's perfectly legal for manufacturers to put artificial colorings, dyes, in our food. I mean, I find the whole concept of a food manufacturing industry extraordinary. Mm-hmm. Food grows, you know, we pick it or we kill it, but it doesn't get manufactured. So there's all sorts of artificial additives, there's texturizers, there's this, there's that. Almost all of them are toxic. One or two exceptions, vitamin C and vitamin E are used, ascorbic acid and vitamin E, and they are perfectly all right. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, they're used as preservatives because they stop food with fat in it going rancid on the shelf. And that's what they do in our bodies. They stop fat becoming oxidized. Right. So, you know, if it's vitamin E or vitamin C, it's okay, but nothing else should be added. Okay. And the fourth and final golden rule is, I think, the most important, but it's the one that people have most trouble with. And that is to eat organic, only organic and free range. Mm-hmm. So free range applies to animal food, obviously not to plant food. So it means that the chickens or the cows, pigs, or the sheep, but sheep almost always are free range, are ranging freely, you know, on the grass, on the hillside. They can peck, they can nibble, they can graze, they can live something close to their natural lives, and they're not penned in. Obviously, hens have to be penned in at night, so the foxes don't eat them. But other than that, but they're not battery farmed. And battery farming is incredibly cruel, it's unethical, and it's also very bad for the consumer, because those animals are fed on rubbish and they're unbelievably stressed and distressed. That means their immune system is to pot. They keep getting infections, so they're dosed with antibiotics. It's a cascade of intervention. And so you don't want that. You only want to eat, if you're a meat eater or an egg eater, only free range. And organic applies to animals and plants. And people think organic is some weird new special food. But actually, organic means ordinary food, just like our great grandparents ate, that hasn't been fed antibiotics, hasn't been fed synthetic hormones, and most of all, hasn't been sprayed with insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, pesticides. If it's not organic, it probably has been sprayed with those, the collective term is biocides, substances that kill living things. Yeah. Pesticides and so on, they were designed as nerve gases originally. And they still damage the nervous system. They damage the endocrine system, which means they mess with your hormones big time. And they are carcinogenic, many of them acknowledged to be so by the World Health Organization. So if you're not eating organic, sadly, you're consuming all that. And it's a bit worse now that we've left the EU, because it used to be illegal, it still is illegal in the EU, to feed synthetic hormones to cows and pigs. But now we've left, I think we'll be revoking that law, but even if we haven't, now we've left, we're importing far more of our meat from non-EU countries like America, where none of those rules apply. I mean, they can put hormones and God knows what they like into their animals over there. So make sure it's organic. Now, there are three responses to the inevitable objection that it's more expensive. It is more expensive. Objection number one, it shouldn't be. So write to your MP and say, why are the government subsidizing the big ag chemical companies that farm industrially and not subsidizing the small human scale farms of the organic farmers that make us all so much healthier? So that's one. Second thing is, how expensive it is depends on how much you buy. So let's say the average family is eating a battery chicken, battery farmed 4 times a week. Well, if you change to organic free range, but only eat it once a week, because that's all you need, you don't need meat every day, then it actually works out cheaper, but you're replacing quantity with quality. And the third response to the complaint that it's more expensive is about priorities, because in the 1950s and 60s, we spent about 33% of our income on food. 33%, a third of our total income was spent on food. And now that's gone down to about 8%. Wow. So we have to reprioritize. We really do. I have literally had a patient sit in my office and say to me, I can't afford all this organic food. I really can't. Oh, by the way, I need to postpone next month's consultation because we're going to Barbados. I mean, literally. Literally.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's not good to go to Barbados. They'll get lots of vitamin D there. But, you know, I have probably fewer holidays, but I eat organic.
Yeah.
So it is about prioritizing.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny, isn't it, that it's this mindset, how we've been programmed to think organic is something special because it's been labeled as such. Organic is what we should, organic is normal, it's natural.
It's what we've been eating for millions of years.
Yeah. The other thing I've noticed, Jenny, is certainly with some fruits, namely grapes and apples, they're so sweet.
They have become very, very sweet. They have been bred, sometimes actually by genetic modification and sometimes by the older form of genetic modification, which is selective breeding. They have been bred to be unbearably sweet.
Unbearably, I squint when I taste it.
Yes,
great.
Yes, that's right. That's why I'm advocating black currants, because they're more or less the only fruit, and red currants, which are still as sharp as nature made them. Yeah, you're absolutely right. They have been made far too sweet. And therefore fruit, which is essentially a healthy food, is becoming a problem food. I think there's also a seasonal issue. You know, we should not be importing strawberries from South America and eating them in January.
Yes.
You know, that's crazy. We should be having them in season and in moderation.
Yeah.
You know, having said that, oranges are in season in the winter, and although they don't grow in the British Isles, they grow not too far south in southern Europe, and they're a great source of vitamin C through a British winter.
And no coincidence that they grow in winter when we need it.
When we need it.
Yeah. You in the book, you've got some really fantastic case studies. There's several of them, and I think they're so interesting to read because when you put it into practice and you hear a clinical story of something happening to a real person, it really resonates.
And case histories is how medicine used to be taught.
Yes.
That is how doctors used to be taught.
Yeah. Because it sticks more as well, because you can hook it onto a person.
Exactly. It's real.
But tell us, you mentioned a patient, a real one, you said, who was having headaches and stomach aches at the same time. Could you tell us what was going on with that?
This is somebody that contacted me, but I wasn't taking on new patients, so I referred them to a colleague.
Right, okay.
Right, but I'm just giving that as an example of how the dots do not get joined up.
Yeah.
But I can certainly give you an example of a patient of mine who illustrates many of the points we've been talking about. So this was a very young man, like late 20s, who said he'd been pretty healthy all his life, although on further inquiry, perhaps not. But he had a diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. And what is unusual about this case is that he came to see me only 4 months after getting the diagnosis. That's the right way round, because natural medicine, I mean, nutritional and environmental medicine, ecological medicine, what I do, but also herbal medicine, Chinese herbal medicine, acupuncture, homeopathy, osteopathy, all the natural forms of medicine all work better, like anything does, if you use it sooner. And I have this vision that if we could use these natural forms of medicine as the first resort, then we'd have orthodox medicine doing what it's good at, being the last resort when things have really got very bad.
Yeah.
And usually that's not what happens in practice. So mostly my colleagues and I see patients who've been through the mill. So my more typical patient with multiple sclerosis has had it for 15 years. They've been on the drugs are making them sick. They're really limping very badly. They haven't got much energy. And then they come to see me. Now, I can help that sort of person, but I can't cure them, right? I can make them a lot better, but it is so much better if they come at an early stage. Yeah. And I love this young man because that's what he did. He just... Give me one moment. We're going to have to edit this section because there's gardening happening right outside the window and I have to stop it. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
It's making a noise. I'm sorry, love. That sniffing is really, really interfering. We're hearing it loudly, so we're going to have to stop. We'll be done in about 20 minutes. Sorry about that.
You want us to start that bit from the top, or do you want to just carry
well, you can edit out the chunk. I'll just start talking about the patient. Okay. So The thing about ecological medicine and the search for causes is it's not simple, because almost always a serious illness has more than one cause. And it's probably better to talk about contributing factors rather than causes. So in the case of this young man, I asked a question that, of course, the neurologist had not asked, which is, when did your symptoms begin? And it turned out, although he'd had the diagnosis for 4 months, his symptoms had begun 5 months previously, where suddenly he couldn't see, his eyes were blurry, he had an appalling headache and could hardly move. So neurological symptoms. And I said, what had happened in the few weeks leading up to that? What had happened was that he'd had his office sprayed for insects, right? I'm not going to specify what the insects were, because they're quite unusual insects. But typical insects in this scenario would be silverfish or cockroaches, you know, and they don't have to be insects, they could be rats or mice. But he had had his office sprayed for this infestation, and it was hot summer. And the people doing the spraying, who were wearing total protective suits, had said to him quite sensibly, you mustn't come back here for 48 hours. Now, I think they should have said, you know, 48 years, frankly, the stuff is toxic and it lasts forever. But they did say, in all fairness, do not come near your office for 48 hours. Mm-hmm. Well, he was back there a few hours later, because he had this mindset of the businessman who's indispensable and his work's very important, and he had to be in that office and he had to be doing his work. And this was, you know, before lockdown and before everyone was on Zoom. So he went, and he spent a long time in his office, and he went back the next day. And within a couple of days, he was getting these blurry eyes and this terrible headache. And, you know, within a month, he was at the optician, who sent him to the neurologist, who said, you know, you've got multiple sclerosis. Now, multiple sclerosis, like every other illness name in the lexicon, is simply a label. It's simply a description of a collection of symptoms that we found in so many people that we've seen the pattern. The diagnostic label is not an explanation of cause or mechanism. No. So it is not the case that either this chap had MS or he had pesticide poisoning. He absolutely had both. He had the MS resulting from it, but it wasn't the only factor. So taking a detailed history, what I discovered was, firstly, he'd used these kind of things, from ant powder to spraying for wasps' nests before. So he'd had previous insecticide exposure. He had an appalling diet. He was just living on, you know, donuts and biscuits and crisps and carbohydrate and rubbish. So virtually no fresh fruit and vegetables, no vitamin C. Mm-hmm. Also, he loved tuna, and he found tins of tuna incredibly convenient. And he was having 2 tins of tuna for his lunch every single day. And he'd been doing that for at least 10 years. So guess what? When I tested his mercury level, it was sky high from the mercury in the tuna fish. Smaller fish are safer. Tuna is a very big fish, and the mercury that's tragically in the oceans builds up through the food chain. You know, sardines are a lot safer than tuna. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so he had high mercury, which is definitely a factor in multiple sclerosis. And what about his vitamin D? It was rock bottom. All right. So you've got all these contributing factors. You've got low vitamin D from no sunshine exposure. You've got terrible diet. You've got mercury, and you've got previous insecticide exposures. Mm-hmm. But as I say, he luckily came to me only 4 months after the diagnosis, and he had already put himself on a diet for autoimmune disease, because MS is autoimmune, which is called the Terry Wahls diet, W-A-H-L-S. She's a famous American doctor who cured herself of MS using this incredibly strict diet. I actually think it's stricter than it needs to be for some people. Mm-hmm. And it was stricter than this chap needed. But just to explain, autoimmunity is the body attacking itself. It's when your own immune system starts destroying your own tissue. In the case of multiple sclerosis, the tissue that's attacked is the myelin sheath that coats the nerves and acts as insulation. Now, myelin is fat, and pesticides are fat. And in fact, in his case, I found that either the pesticides or the mercury, I think it was the mercury, was attached to the gene that makes the myelin.
Wow.
So that was a perfect storm.
Yeah.
But we have to ask the question, which my colleagues in conventional medicine never seem to ask, about autoimmunity, which is, why should the immune system start attacking its own tissue? The immune system's very clever. You know, it's kept us alive for millions of years by knowing the difference between self and other, between your own tissue and alien tissue, which might be a bacterium or a virus, and you have to fight it. So why is it suddenly mistaking the myelin of this chap's nerves for alien tissue? And I would submit that that's because it's become alien because of the toxins in it. So if you've got pesticides or plasticizers or mercury particularly in that tissue, it distorts its protein structure. Now, I know I said myelin is fat, but it also has a protein component. And that's the component that the immune system attacks in multiple sclerosis. We know from Alzheimer's disease that the proteins of the brain and the nerve cells get distorted when they have toxins in them, particularly mercury and aluminium. It creates neurofibrillary tangles, which is abnormal protein. So I guess the immune system's looking at that and saying, that's not right. I'm going to gobble it up. Okay, so those were my thoughts when I first saw this chap. I did lots of tests that confirmed everything I thought, really poor nutrition, vast amounts of toxins. And I said to him, look, recovering from this is going to be challenging. It's going to mean you doing loads of things, changing your lifestyle completely. He was also hardly sleeping. So I said, you've got to stop just sleeping from 2 in the morning to 6 in the morning. You've got to have a lot more sleep, and you've got to put these new things into your life. So organic vegetable juicing every morning for detox, saunas done in a particular way that I describe in the book, also for detox, high doses of vitamin C, some colonic hydrotherapy, because although he said his gut function was fine, when I did a stool test, it was crawling with appalling bugs. So, you know, obviously we gave him probiotics, we radically changed his diet. So he started eating loads of vegetables, a tiny bit of fruit, meat, strictly organic where possible, some fish, but not big fish like tuna. We instituted a mercury detox program, which involves, you know, sulfur and cilantro, which is coriander, and chlorella, and loads of selenium, loads of zinc, very high dose vitamin C. And what else did we do? Yeah, Epsom salts baths, which relaxes the muscles, and the magnesium and the sulfate in there both assist with detox as well. I asked him to sprout broccoli and alfalfa and mung beans and other seeds on his window ledge, eat those tiny sprouts, and water them with liquid which had zinc and selenium liquid supplements in them. Then the plant absorbs all that goodness and you integrate it into your body in a much more natural way. And radically changed his diet, taking all the carbohydrates out. Not all the carbohydrates. I was fine for him to have, you know, potatoes, carrots, pumpkin, even some grains, which I know a lot of people disagree with, but in moderation and non-gluten. So that meant he had to stop, you know, the donuts, the croissants that he was living on, the bread, all of this. Now that's very challenging, but what's crucial is he had a very supportive family. You know, his wife and his mum were completely on board. And it's very hard to do a challenging program like that unless you've got supportive people around you. And he did have. So, you know, a few weeks later, the headache had gone, the numbness, you know, the patches of numbness and pain and tingling that you get with MS, that had all gone. And his sight was back to normal. And the optician couldn't believe it. But this is the point where, you know, the optician and the neurologist fall down, because instead of saying, wow, I haven't seen this kind of transformation before, tell me how you did it, it might help my other patients. They just glaze over, okay, no groove in the brain to put that into, doesn't fit the pattern, on to the next patient. And I've seen this again and again.
And I think sometimes doctors will hide behind their own jargon and say, well, it's idiopathic or it's cryptogenic. Basically, Latin and Greek for saying we can't answer why.
Exactly. All that means is we don't know why. All that means is we don't know why. Or they'll say, oh, then it wasn't MS in the first place. And they find ways of saying that without saying we got it wrong. It's almost like you were imagining it. However, there's a caveat to this case history. It's not all sunshine, because yes, he got dramatically better, but then sorry, the phone's ringing. I'm not going to answer it, and I'm turning the volume down so that you won't hear the message that's left, but you will hear the ringing.
when it finishes, just start again with "there's a caveat," and then we'll be fine.
There is a caveat to this case history. Yes, he got dramatically better, but then stuff happened, life happens, lockdown happened. So you can't go to saunas when everything's shut. You can't do colonic hydrotherapy when everything's shut. You can still eat organic and do the juicing, but his life became much more complicated because suddenly all his children were home from school. And so he was, along with his wife, but he had a lot of children. He was home educating at the same time. So all these wonderful changes he'd made and all the supplements he was taking, among which I should mention all the B vitamins, including high dose vitamin B12 to help the nervous system recover from anything, even a head injury. Vitamin C, obviously vitamin D, some vitamin E because that was low as well. All the good minerals and crucially the essential fatty acids, omega-3 and omega-6. And I had him on avocados and nuts and seeds and all that sort of thing, frying in coconut oil, but using pure virgin cold pressed safflower oil, sunflower oil and hemp oil as salad dressing. So he had all that. It all went out the window. He couldn't keep it up. Within 2 weeks, he was back on the donuts and he was very ill again. All the symptoms came back, and interestingly, symptoms he hadn't had before with his first episode of MS. So pain in the back, pain in the chest, different bits of his legs hurting. Within a week or two of being back on eating carbohydrate and off the program, everything got worse again. Wow. So he'd ring me up and say what to do. And I said, well, you have to get back on the wagon. Yeah. And it's really challenging. And this has happened with this chap 3 or 4 times. Life has got on top of him. He's fallen off the wagon. He's got worse. Within 2 weeks of getting back on the program, he does get completely better again. But that time will lengthen if he keeps relapsing. Yeah. And that's life. And I should mention one more supplement that's crucial for him. Unfortunately, it's a really expensive supplement. It's called phosphatidylcholine, or PC. And again, I sent him to one of my colleagues to have that intravenously after a year or so of working with him, because that will help him even more. But the moral of the story is, it's tough to do this kind of medicine. You know, the patient has to stick to it. And the more motivated they are, the better they will stay. So he can be perfectly well when he's on his program. But, you know, he's living in a world where nobody else is eating like that. He goes to a work meeting and they're all breaking out the donuts. It's tough. And I understand that it's tough. All I can do is give people the information and hope that they learn by their own repeated experience that when they get off the program, they get ill again. Not everyone is as challenged as that. Some people need to make far fewer changes.
It segues beautifully into something that I noted with most of the case studies in your book, is that there's no overnight miraculous improvement. This is a slow burn. And in your case studies, you're checking in at them at 4 months, at 6 months, at 12 months. And it wasn't like this, a trajectory. It was a little bit up and down. And it's about trust and patience and resilience and
support
and that slow burn, and also a good dollop of common sense and some negotiation. Especially, I think there was a child you were treating, and there's some give and take about, well, if you do this, we can leave this, but there's no overnight miracle. And I think also it's people often are looking for that, but then they've got to the point where they are with their health because they've been doing that for 15 years or 10 years.
Exactly. That's right. I mean, some people have described what happens as a miracle cure, but they're the people who stick to it. What often happens is after 4 or 5 months, people feel dramatically better. And then there's a plateau. They stop improving. But that is the healing trajectory. And you speak to anyone, a homeopath, acupuncturist, herbalist, osteopath, in any form of healing, real healing, that is the trajectory. You get a period of improvement, and then you get a flattening of the curve. Oh, I hate that expression. Why did I say that? Then you get a straight line for a while, and then you get a bit more improvement. So it can be dramatic, but it needs hard work. And then eventually it doesn't feel like hard work anymore, because that is your lifestyle. So we don't say it's terribly onerous to clean our teeth every morning and every evening, because we've been taught from childhood You know, if we've been taught from childhood that you eat really healthy food, and yeah, there is this addictive rubbish out there that your friends are eating.
Yeah.
But you have to say no to it, and you don't have to say no to it every single time. Because if you get your gut flora fundamentally healthy, you can occasionally, you know, indulge in a piece of cheesecake without totally starting to eat rubbish every day.
Sure.
You should have the resilience to do that. And not with the chap I was just describing, but with most of my patients, I do say, you know what, stick to these rules and taking the supplements you need 6 days a week, just 6 days a week, you know, so you don't start to feel deprived.
Yeah. So I know, Jenny, that you talk the talk and you walk the walk, but would you tell us what a typical day for you is, including sort of health things that you do yourself?
Okay, so when I wake up at this time of the year, I will go in the garden barefoot so that I can stand on the grass and my electromagnetic field is aligned with that of the earth. Now, on the one hand, this is simply A-level physics. On the other hand, it sounds like wacky hippie mysticism, but actually they coincide, and I feel much better when I've got my feet on the ground. Sometimes I will do a meditation sitting on a chair, but in the garden and with my feet on the grass. You know, between November and April, you can't really do that. It's too cold. But what you can do at that time of year is put your hands on the grass and you get that same feeling of grounding and earthing, and it's very calming. And I go for a walk. I always go for a walk at least 45 minutes in the morning. It was only 40 minutes today because I wanted to get back to record this with you. But yeah, I go for a walk, and honestly, I work so much better the rest of the day if I've had a lot of exercise. So 2 days out of 7, I go swimming instead, although actually it's a half-hour walk to the pool and back, so I get both. Swimming is always a compromise because there is chlorine in my local pool. I don't like it, it's toxic, but I take an iodine tablet that day before or after the swim, which slightly counteracts the chlorine. But I think the benefit of the exercise, you know, that's my favorite form of exercise, outweighs the chlorine, and I don't have chlorine coming out of my own tap. Okay, so I've got a water filter. So after I've done my exercise, I will have breakfast, which will tend to be salad and an omelette or a spinach omelette or something that is sometimes organic free range bacon, tomatoes, mushrooms, spinach, salad, but something that's essentially protein. I am not completely carbohydrate free at all. I think most women can't be, certainly not long term. So, you know, lunch will be something like, it'll be meat or fish with vegetables again, and that will include potatoes, so it's not carbohydrate free. And maybe dinner will be less protein heavy, but sometimes a little bit of chicken or turkey or something like that with rice, and again, vegetables. I try to eat really early. I try to eat dinner, finish it by 6 o'clock. And go to bed at 10ish, because you need that 4-hour gap. Now, I don't always stick to that. Obviously, if I'm socializing or people around for dinner, we eat 8 or something, but I feel the effects, you know, because you want to have finished digesting before you get horizontal and go to sleep. So when I come back from my walk in the morning, I will usually be working at my desk because I'm writing, I'm recording interviews, I'm preparing for talks, that sort of thing, and dealing with the emails, as we all have to. But what I'm trying to do is set an alarm, set a timer, so that when I've been sat at my desk for 25 minutes, I get up and walk about and do something physical for 5 minutes before I sit down again. Because even though I've had a 45-minute walk, or at weekends a 2 or 3 hour walk, it's still really bad to be sitting continually. You know, we need to get up and move around. So I have to set an alarm, otherwise I forget to do that. You know, if I've had a very late night or a very early morning, I'll occasionally lie down for an hour in the afternoon. I think having a siesta is natural and pretty well universal. And I will try to finish work by 5 or 6 in the evening so I can, you know, listen to music, see friends, read a book. I read avidly. That's what I'm doing all the time I'm not working, is reading. And I tend to alternate fiction with non-fiction. And there's as much truth in the fiction as there is in the non-fiction.
And now, so we're at the beginning of September as we record this, we're moving into autumn. And you mentioned about eating seasonally earlier as well. What would your top tips be, Jenny, for as we transition from summer to autumn?
Okay, so the 4 chapters in the book, which are winter, spring, summer and autumn, tell you in depth what's in season and what's not in season, what to eat, what not to eat much of at each season. And the first half of autumn is pretty well still like summer. There's plenty of summer veg around, and there's the beginning of the pumpkins and the squash and all those excellent root veg. And so it's pretty well like summer. And if you've had plenty of sunshine and your vitamin D level is all right, you shouldn't actually need any supplements until we get into the second half of autumn. And when we get into the second half of autumn, so November basically, then we need to think as if it's winter. So we need to start taking vitamin C every day, morning and evening, lunchtime as well if you can remember, but most people can't. We need to be taking vitamin D, and we need to be taking the minerals that protect us against infection, whether that's bacterial or viral. And they are zinc in a good dose and selenium in a low dose. Now, some people start getting their coughs and colds in October, November. Other people, January, February is their worst time. If you know when your worst time is, that's when to start taking selenium, because I think you can overdose on it. I would just take it as a supplement for 2 or 3 months of the year, whichever is your worst part of the autumn or winter or early spring for getting ill. And the rest of the year, you can just eat some Brazil nuts and that'll give you a maintenance dose of selenium. So basically you treat the first half of autumn more or less like summer, but the second half of autumn more or less like winter. And you have to protect yourself with the vitamin C, the vitamin D and the zinc from whatever viruses or bacteria are going to hit us. Now, there's a health hazard in autumn that actually starts quite early in autumn, which is molds. And most people aren't aware of it, but molds grow where it's damp, and it's damp in all our houses. You know, we keep the windows shut and then we breathe out, we exhale water vapor, we cook, we bath and we shower. So all that water vapor condenses where the walls meet the ceiling, and mold grows. It may be invisible, but if it's actually black mold in the bathroom, you've got a problem. Molds are living creatures, but they give out waste products, metabolites, which are just as toxic as synthetic chemicals. And I do describe in the autumn chapter of my book in depth how to prevent this. And what you want to do, it's not very ecologically sound and it's very, very expensive now, but to some extent you want to have the house warm, but the windows open. And this is controversial, and I struggle with it myself because I want to conserve energy, as we all do. But the fact of the matter is, if you've got all the windows closed and you've got total insulation, then all the air from your breathing out and your cooking and your showering is going to result in mold. So I think we have to keep the windows open all year round and have some heating on in the winter. And if your friends come around and say, the heat's going out the window, you say, yeah, I'm afraid some of it is, but so are the mold spores. And so are the chemicals we haven't mentioned from synthetic furnishings. So the flame retardants, the polybrominated biphenyls, which are incredibly toxic, must by law be added to synthetic furniture. So your new sofa, mattress, carpets, curtains, they're outgassing all that stuff. So if you must buy that stuff, buy it secondhand and buy it in the spring so you can have the windows open without freezing, you know, and let those chemicals and the mold toxins go out the window, which does mean a little bit of warmth and the windows open.
And as you said previously as well, we used to wrap up. We scarves, jumpers, we used to wrap up. Yeah.
We had an electric fire in one room. I know my husband's parents had a coal fire or a wood burning stove in one room. And that was it. You took the electric fire up to the bedroom to preheat it for half an hour before you went to bed. I mean, they were actually incredibly dangerous. You know, and the gas fire used to make us fall asleep. I remember that. But yeah, you need to keep moving and you need to wrap up. We shouldn't be expecting to be sitting in our houses in winter as if we were on a beach. You know, you need a vest, a t-shirt, a jumper. Yeah.
We're nearly coming to the end. I wanted to ask you something quite light-hearted, Jenny, just so to know something about you. So I wanted to ask, what would be 3 items that you would take to a desert island with you, just spontaneously?
Okay, this is Desert Island Discs. Actually, for me, it's Desert Island books.
Okay.
So my 3 luxury items, 2 of them would be books. One is a marvelous book called Up from Eden by Ken Wilber. He's a philosopher. And it's, how can I describe it? Transcendental evolutionary philosophy. So that's Wilber, spelt W-I-L-B-E-R, if anyone wants to check it out. A very, very long and in-depth and challenging, wonderful book, Up from Eden by Ken Wilber. I think to balance that, I'd have some fiction. So probably the greatest novel in the English language, which is Middlemarch by George Eliot. I've read it many times, but I shall reread it on the island. And the third thing would be music, I think. How much music am I allowed? How strict are you going to be?
Three pieces of music.
Okay. Well, we'll have Leonard Cohen, Tchaikovsky, and Beethoven.
Brilliant. Okay. So, Jenny, thank you so much for your time and talking to us. You are such an inspiration, and your book is honestly brilliant. I keep dipping into it. How long did it take you to write?
Yeah, that's a difficult question to answer because I was also working full-time in clinic. So it took longer than it would have done. I think it took 2 years.
Okay.
Because none of that time was I fully doing nothing but writing the book. I think it took most of 2018 and 2019.
Right.
But that's because I literally just had every other Monday when I wasn't working. So I was doing one whole day a fortnight. But then I realized I was never going to finish it. So I had 3 one-week writing retreats where I just went away, no phone, no email, nothing, and got fed and looked after in this retreat center and just wrote like a whole chapter per retreat. That's the way to do it.
And what inspired you to write it as well? I didn't know.
Oh, my patients. Because every single person who got better, which was almost every single person, said in the final consultation, why didn't my GP know all this? Why didn't my GP know all this? And why doesn't everybody know all this? And please, will you put it in a book? And the thing about putting it in a book is, when I was just seeing patients, I could help maybe 5 people in a day, 4 or 5. And in that time, 1,000 people can read the book. So it's about democratizing medicine. It's about demystifying medicine. And it's about making this information available in a self-help way to as many people as possible. So I know about 9,000 or 10,000 people have bought the book. Vastly more than that have read the book, because unfortunately people pass the book around and lend and borrow. So that doesn't show up in the sales figures. As of now, I haven't made any money from the book at all, because it all goes first to the publishers, apart from the advance that I got, which enabled me to do those 3 retreats where I finally got the book written. But the thing is, if people read it and love it and want to share it with their friend, if they will buy it for their friend rather than lend it to their friend, that will go well, because the more it sells, the more likely the publishers are to ask me to write a second book, which I very much want to do. But yeah, I wrote it to get the word out to as many people as possible. And it was my patients that inspired me to do that.
Yeah, I don't think you do make much money from books. I was listening to Dave Asprey, and he was saying exactly the same thing. You write it because you want to write it. It's a vocational pull that you want to be good.
And for me, it's in continuity with seeing patients. It's another way of doing the same work, because 90% of what I was doing in my consultations was educating people, showing them what they could do for themselves. So that's what I want to do for the world at large. But we desperately want you to write a second book, Jenny. You are an inspiration, and you're doing so much good. And certainly I recommend the book to so many of my patients. And well, you know, don't you, that doctor means teacher in Latin?
Yes. And I think, what you're doing is just having an exponential effect, positive effect, because one person will mention it to another and it will just ripple through. But your knowledge is just so profound as well. And I'm so grateful that you're around. Thank you. Well, it was learned through doing. Yeah. Wasn't learnt in medical school. No. And so where can people, I know you're not doing clinical practice anymore, Jenny, so where can people find you? Yes, I've retired from clinical practice. I really want to focus on the writing and the teaching and the speaking and the spreading the words. My website is drjennygoodman.com.
And on there, you'll find all my social media, I think they're called handles.
Yes.
I mean, I'm really not social media savvy. I've got a wonderful young person who's doing this for me. So I can never remember my Instagram handle, but I know I've got 5,200 people following me on Instagram, which is very nice. If they all bought the book, instead of asking me questions that are answered in the book, that would be lovely. So yeah, the website, drjennygoodman.com, has got, if you scroll down, all the links to Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Mm-hmm. And talks that I've got that are forthcoming are this Saturday, the 10th of September. I'm speaking at what looks to be a lovely festival. It's called Wellbeing by the Lakes, and it's in Dorset, right? Not the Lake District, some lakes in Dorset. So I'm going down there, and I shall be speaking there on Saturday. And then the following Sunday, the 18th, I have got a speaking engagement, which is very new for me. It's at Sustainable Fashion Week, right? And it's really about how textiles and fabrics can become, you know, ethical, sustainable, safe for the people who manufacture them and grow the cotton or whatever, but also safe for the people who wear them. We've become aware recently of how many toxins can be embedded in our sheets and blankets, our nighties, our underwear, our clothes that we wear. So sustainable fashion is about ethics, but it's also about toxicity. So I'll be talking about how we can basically find fabrics that are safe, because just like we know with moisturizer and cosmetics, what's on your skin goes into your skin. And if that cotton was drenched in pesticides, it's a problem. So organic cotton, organic wool. So that's coming up on the 18th of September. On Wednesday, the 21st of September, I'm speaking in the evening at the College of Naturopathic Medicine in King's Cross, which is a wonderful institution. And that's for the general public. These are all open to the general public. And then on Saturday, the 24th of September in the morning, I believe I'm the opening speaker at the annual conference of the ANP, which is another wonderful organization. It's the Association of Naturopathic Practitioners. And it's a very broad church. So, you know, members are naturopaths, nutritionists, herbalists, homeopaths, all of those. And increasingly doctors like me.
Those dates for your talks on your website as well, or is it?
They should be. I will speak to the wonderful George and make sure that they are. Yeah, they should be. And they're on a recent Instagram post, except for the ANP, which isn't yet.
Okay. Well, Jenny, thanks again. Thank you for everything that you're doing to help everybody. It's just been a joy to talk to you. I've learned so much as well. And
well, thank you, Maria. And I'm just delighted that as a GP yourself, you're interested in this and open to it. So, you know, spread the word to your other colleagues.
I will. Thank you, Jenny.
Lovely to speak to you. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.